Christian symbols in Thelema really fast. So you may see a lot of similarities in Thelema with using crosses and circles and the serpent and the dove. A lot of other things may look very similar. Even the Gnostic Mass has its roots in structure to the Catholic Mass. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of the words and the symbols we use are not the same and don't actually have the same meaning. So they have the visual similarity, and that makes sense because the person who wrote a lot of these rituals was Aleister Crowley, and he had a very Christian upbringing, a very strict Christian upbringing. So a lot of the way he expressed himself and understood things was with this King Jamesian sort of language in his writing, but also making use of Christian symbols, but sometimes turning them on their head to communicate a new message or new meaning. So, for example, the serpent in Thelema and a lot of Thelemic texts references the serpent rising or the Kundalini, right? And so the idea that going on the way of return or progressing on your spiritual path, you're awakening the Kundalini. So that's one way of understanding the serpent. So it's not necessarily the serpent in the Garden of Eden, although again in Thelema, when we think about the serpent as teaching knowledge to humanity, so it wasn't a bad thing, but something that brought enlightenment to mankind in the Garden of Eden. And so the dove also is viewed not necessarily in reference to the story of Noah and the Great Flood, but viewing the dove as a symbol of spreading enlightenment and of being of service to the community, descending down the tree of life towards Malkuth. So different ways of understanding symbolism and stuff. And again, Thelema and its underlying principles and philosophies in the Book of the Law are messages of the divine, right? They're communicating the ineffable. So how do you deal with that? For a lot of people, they're dealing with religious trauma. They're dealing with these symbols and what those mean, and that can be very hard to deal with. And maybe in their personal spiritual practice, they don't want to make use of crosses. They don't want to make use of the dove and the serpent, and that's perfectly valid. And I think that you can very meaningfully interact with Thelema a bunch of different ways, and there's nothing that says you have to wear a cross or have a cross around. I have a universal hexagram behind me. I find that a very meaningful and beautiful symbol, but your practice may look different. And how you make use of symbols and what they mean to you is a journey to go on and experience. But something to always keep in mind is just because you recognize the same symbol from Christianity, remember that it does not mean the same thing in Thelema. So you may have to do a little extra work to reacquaint yourself to what those symbols mean within a Thelemic context.